Hey guys, and welcome to another huge episode of Triggered. And today is going to be an especially important show because we're doing a deep dive into the massive scandal happening inside school districts across the country, but specifically in California, where teachers committing abuse against students are basically getting a free pass, protected by the unions and left-wing power centers. And one attorney is taking this fight head on, and he'll be here to lay it all out. You've probably heard a little bit about the story where it's become basically impossible, like virtually impossible, to fire bad teachers, even ones who commit illegal acts. It's a really big deal. It's why our students are underperforming so terribly across the globe and relative to the rest of the world. And we're going to shine a spotlight on all of it today. If you guys know about it, if you make some noise, if you make a big stink, maybe, just maybe, we can actually get rid of bad teachers and get competent ones to take their place. And maybe, if all of that happens, our children have a shot at the future they deserve. So today's going to be a really interesting show. Make sure you guys are liking, sharing, subscribing. Go hit the little like button right now. Spread it out there with your friends. Send it to them by text message. Share it out there. Subscribe so you never miss the show here on Rumble. It's a really big deal to get this information out there. If you do miss the show here on Rumble, make sure you head over to Apple and to Spotify. You can catch it that way. If your friends get their podcast that way, make sure they are aware. Again, you guys are the first line of defense, okay? I can get the word out there. Mainstream media is not going to do it. You guys sharing it will make these things manifest themselves into action. For all of the top headlines that we cover on the show, go over to my news app, MXM News, where you can get the mainstream news without the mainstream bias. And of course, don't forget about our brave sponsors for having the guts to support this program. Certainly one of our newer sponsors, Immuno 150. We talk about it all the time on the show, being prepared. Prepare for the future. And that starts, obviously, with your health. Immuno 150 is bringing people back to good, healthy living. Their nutritional supplements pack everything your body actually needs into one place. 12 vitamins, 17 antioxidants, 17 amino acids, omega-3, 6, and 9, and a whole lot more. And here's the key. It's all micro-blended for total assimilation and digestion. That means your body actually absorbs it. Not like those cheap supplements where half of the stuff just passes right through you. Immuno 150 has nearly everything the human body needs to get healthy and to stay healthy. So go to immuno150.com. That's IMMUNO150.com and check it out today. And guys, it's just months, and just a few months really, we're going to be celebrating America's 250th birthday. And it's the perfect time to experience our history for yourself. From Gettysburg to Independence Hall, from presidential homes to national battlefields, the Heritage Guide to Historic Sites helps families explore America's most important places with confidence. Fight back against the rewriting of America's past and visit America's historic sites without any woke bias or far-left lunacy. The Heritage Guide to Historic Sites gives families a clear path to the real story of America. Learn more at heritage.org/Don Jr. That's heritage.org/DONJR. Guys, joining me now is attorney and victim right advocate John Manley. John, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, it's great to have you on as a first-time guest. So maybe just to start, could you introduce yourself to the audience and lay out how your work standing up for victims has put you in the national spotlight and why this really matters now more than ever?
Sure. I'm not a trial lawyer or a plaintiff lawyer by training. I'm actually a real estate lawyer. I represented real estate developers for years and years and years.
I've dealt with those types quite a bit before I took on this new world.
Suspect.
Yeah.
But me, not you.
Yeah.
What ended up happening is one of our business clients had a a child that was molested by somebody, and we took the case and got a record result in 2001. And my phone just exploded, initially with cases involving religious institutions, um, other childcare institutions. But in 2012, we got a case involving a public school. And up until that time, you could not sue a public school in California. We got the law changed.
Wait, how is that even possible?
Well, it's actually the case in most states. There's what is called sovereign immunity. So you can't sue the government, even if the school knows that, for example, the teacher's a pedophile and they let him stay, you can't sue him, except under a very limited federal statute where the statute of limitations is very, very short.
So there's no accountability, no culpability for this before, I guess, these cases?
In most states, the answer is no. Schools have total immunity in many states. Now, not California. Well, like I said, we were able to get the law changed. And when I first started doing these cases, I would say if this happened in a public school, there would be retribution. I just had no idea of the magnitude of this. Mm-hmm. And so as time went on and it began to get worse and worse and worse, I started to look into it. And what I found is that it's an epidemic. The federal government, both in 2004, the Department of Education, and 2017, in December of 17, the Department of Justice determined in two studies that 10% of students in K through 12 public schools in this country will suffer some sort of sexual misconduct by teachers.
Did you just say 10%?
I said 10%. So
I mean, that's millions of kids.
There's 57 million kids in public schools, and so in this country, and so you have 5.7 million a year that will suffer some sort of sexual misconduct. I want to be clear, not all of it's molestation, but it has a gamut ranging from inappropriate sexual talk all the way to rape. And even if it was half that or a quarter of that,
if it's one,
yeah. Even if it's 1%. So can you imagine? I'm
saying one child, but yeah.
Yeah, one child. Can you imagine if 10% of flight attendants in this country were turned out to be child molesters, or pick a profession? What would happen? But yet here we have institutionalized protections of teachers, largely through teachers' unions and school districts, and what I call the public education sort of machine that engages in protection. And it's important to understand here that schools are nor is anybody else, any other corporation, liable if somebody molests a child. The only reason they can be civilly liable for damages is if we can prove that the school knew or had reason to know this person was a perpetrator. So you see millions of dollars in settlements, in some cases billions, over in states, and it's because they knew and did nothing. Now, these are not college students. That's bad enough. These are not adult women. That's bad enough. These are children, little children, kindergartners, third graders, sixth graders, adolescents from 3 to 17. And so, the good news is, we thought in California and a few other states, they passed statutory windows to address this. And so we were able to, lift the statute of limitations on some of these older cases and go after the institutions that allowed this to occur. And what's happened now is there are certain elements in California's political establishment that are getting pressure from teachers, from joint powers authorities, which are these public entities that sort of operate the insurance apparatus for schools, and teachers' unions that are trying to shut this down. Moreover, they're opposing any kind of real reform, and it's political. And it's not Republican, it's not Democrat, it's just wrong. So that's the background.
Well, I mean, if you were able to change the law in California, I can't imagine this not being like a 99-1 issue that everyone in the country would agree on, except for portions of it, probably the radical left, who are sort of okay with all of these insanities. And obviously they control the teachers union, so it may not be political, but the reality is the teachers union probably hasn't donated to a Republican in decades. They're one of the largest fundraising apparati for the Democrat Party. So I imagine it's still concentrated that way. The issue itself may not be political, but clearly the teachers' unions are and have been for a long time. I mean, how do we not? I mean, it feels like this is something you can get in front of Congress, and I can't imagine that congressman holding their seat for very long if they don't vote for this.
Well, it's funny you say that because the bill opening a statute of limitations passed unanimously. Every member of the legislature in California voted for it. That never happens. They wouldn't vote for the 4th of July unanimously, but they did this.
In California, they'd probably vote against it. But yes, I understand what you're saying.
But what's strange is it's an interesting dichotomy. We have a Democrat state senator named Perez, who is a left-wing Democrat, but courageously put a bill in to actually establish real reform. The teachers union not only opposed it, they withdrew her support for her. And we have, so it's beyond me that we have, a Speaker of the Assembly, for example, Speaker Rivas, who refuses to meet with survivors of public schools. We asked him repeatedly, won't do it. Why? And I think, sadly, you've hit the nail on the head. I want to be clear. This is not every Democrat, but this is certain Democrats who just are, I think, care more about politics than children. And I don't understand for the life of me how a teachers union, the first job of a teacher, the first job of any of us, is to stand between somebody who hurt a child and do our job. We got to stand between them, and they won't. They oppose any type of legitimate reform. They oppose mandatory reporting. Imagine an organization that that's supposed to help us educate our kids, and is the largest teacher organization in the country. The American Federation of Teachers, the National Educational Association, the California Federation of Teachers, and they oppose mandatory reporting when you suspect a child is being sexually abused. What? And that's what we're dealing with. So I'm hoping that we can get people to pay attention to this. And we certainly have some attention in Congress. We had, over time we've had some success, but it's just, when you meet these families, these kids, and the irony is, in California, 95% of the victims are Latino and Black. Mm-hmm. They're all the children that these folks say they want to protect, and they're all minority kids. This doesn't happen in Pacific Palisades or Malibu. Yeah, it happens in South LA. It happens in Pacoima. It happens in the Central Valley. It's just maddening that we're at this point, and the hypocrisy is staggering.
Well, I mean, I know your firm's been in the trenches on this now for years, and you've called what's happening in California public schools an epidemic, which, 10%, 5.7 million kids facing some sort of, sexual abuse. I mean, I don't know what's much more of an, epidemic than that. And I know, again, that's not a word you throw around lightly. For people who are just hearing about this for the first time, the number, 5.7 million kids potentially affected throughout the country. I mean, that's insane to me. I mean, honestly, it's an issue I suspected, but it's not something I was even, all that much aware of until, even some of my team sort of saw what you were doing and were like, hey, man, this is like an issue we have to highlight, in terms of the actual scale. Man, I can't think of, a bigger issue. I mean, this seems like something that we should be able to go to any congressman, in any district in the country and just be able to say, hey, why don't you run with this legislation? Like, if you got 100% of the California legislature to vote for it, who wouldn't vote for it?
Well, I think that's true. It reminds me a lot of the USA Gymnastics case, where I was the lead counsel. And when the Senate and the House got wind of that, they put in legislation, and your father signed it in his first term. So I think the answer is they don't know. I think people hear this and they think it's some crazy plaintiff attorney in California spewing BS. These are not my statistics. This is the U.S. Justice Department in the Bush administration, and the the Department of Education in the second Bush administration, and the Department of Justice in the Obama administration. And the woman who authored those studies has subsequently written a book. It was published in December of 24 by Harvard, not known as a bastion of right-wing thinking. And she now believes it's 17%.
Yeah, because I was going to ask you, because it sounds like, the data I was reading about in sort of, prepping for this is, it suggests up to 17% of public school students nationally will experience or witness, sexual misconduct by school personnel. 17%. I mean, by the way, again, if it was 1%, it's too much. If it was one student, I think that's too much. But up to 17% through sort of, again, data published by Harvard, to your point, not exactly a bastion of right-wing thought. Walk us through that number, because that's just wild.
It's based on data she's collected. She's a PhD and was at Hofstra for many years. I forget where she is now, but she's a well-respected scholar and not somebody who has a political bent at all. She's just an academic. And, I can just tell you empirically, I see this accelerating. I've been doing it a long time. I've been doing 30 years. And I don't know why it's accelerating, but it is. But what's really troubling is not the fact that it's troubling that anybody would be a pedophile in a school. Okay. But that's where pedophiles go. They go to youth organizations. And, pedophiles.
It's like when you ask the bank robbers, why do you rob banks? It's because that's where the money is, I guess.
That's where the dough is, right? Yeah. So here, what's really disturbing is the total indifference, and worse, in many instances, institutional concealment of this. Okay, for example, in LA Unified, there's 2 administrators that were convicted of failing to report a sex abuse case. Convicted, sentenced. They still work there. In fact, they've been promoted. There's LAUSD has an assignment agreement, an agreement with the union where you get reassigned, if you've, among other things, if you've sexually abused somebody. Okay, there's a reassignment. But guess what? The parents in the class where they think the kid was molested don't get notified. There is not a single law in this country that requires that parents be notified if their teacher was removed for credible allegations of abuse. The Catholic Church even has that rule. The Catholic bishops has the rule. If they remove a priest, since 2002, this has been a rule. If they remove a priest for credible allegations of abuse, they notify the public and the parishes. In public schools, they don't do that. So why?
Yeah, I guess.
Sorry, Don.
You've used the phrase basically passing the trash to describe what happens when a teacher or staff member is accused of abuse. And again, instead of being fired, instead of being prosecuted, instead of being in jail where they belong, they just get quietly reassigned to another school, another district where they can go and do it again. How widespread is that practice? I mean, again, these numbers are staggering, but. And maybe there's no way to track it, because if they're not reporting it, they just sort of do it and hope no one catches it again, and tell these people, don't do it again. I have a feeling that doesn't happen with pedophiles. But what's the framework that's allowing that to happen?
Just because there's no central list. You can't go in any state and find a central list of teachers convicted of pedophilia or removed credit for pedophilia, whether they're convicted or not. You don't have to be convicted to remove. If you did it, you should lose your job. It's impossible because of the unions to fire him. But the answer is the moving a teacher who's been accused of sexual misconduct with a kid to a new school is commonplace in many districts. It's commonplace. And we have instances where somebody's been removed for horrible stuff and they get a letter of recommendation and they go teach in another school. So the states cannot do this on their own. In my opinion, there should be 2 things that happen here. One is committee hearings in the Senate or House on this, where we actually, take evidence so the American public can see it. And secondly, that the Department of Justice and the Department of Education use their tools, which they have, to go after this. And I'm hoping they'll do that. I see these families, I see these kids, and the thing I find and I want to be clear, not every teacher is a perpetrator. The heroes in our cases are teachers. They usually report, and usually they get run over when they report.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. I mean, it's sort of like you're seeing with the fraud allegations in California, in Minnesota, the whistleblowers actually were the ones that faced accountability. They were, blackballed, they were fired, they were not promoted, they were, given crappy jobs for pointing out what was clearly, obviously happening. But, just that squeaky wheel in that case didn't get the oil. It got the exact opposite.
Yeah, no, that's what happens. And, I can think of a case involving this teacher in South LA named Mark Burnt, who did things that are just so bad to children, I can't even say it. And there was one teacher, this young woman who was right out of Berkeley, who wanted to teach in a Title I school in a poor neighborhood for altruistic reasons. And he was exposing himself to the kids. And she reported it, and she was basically run out of the school. So, I just think that, this is the only institution that I have encountered and I know of where if you don't send your kid there, you go to jail. This is not like church or the Boy Scouts or anything else where they're volunteer organizations. If you don't send your kid to school, you go to prison. So, we're in this situation where this is in desperate need of attention.
Well, I mean, you've said, sort of just said it now, but that, basically firing a teacher in most of these states is next to impossible, and that districts often just actually pay them to go away, probably often with that letter of recommendation. How does a parent hear that and not lose their mind? What kind of, grassroots support do you have from parents? Because, it does feel like, again, this is such a sensitive issue affecting so many people. I can't imagine a single parent that would be okay with this in any way, shape, or form. How is it that even someone like me, who sort of does this for a living at this point, doesn't understand anywhere near, the depths of this issue? I figure, hey, I understand incompetence. I understand they promote teachers who don't teach well and they've got tenure. Fine, that's all terrible. Your children are losing out on an education. That's disastrous for their life. But this is so much beyond that, and yet it's almost, again, if I don't know about it, I can't imagine all that many people really understand the depth of the depravity there.
Well, let me take that in two sections. You talked about teachers being paid. So I mentioned this guy, Mark Burnt, who was this teacher in LA. He was basically, and this is a true trigger warning for your audience. So if you have children listening, turn your computer off or whatever is a radio. I don't know. I'm 61. Who knows? But
let's put your volume off for a couple seconds here.
Thank you. He was putting his semen in Oreo cookies and feeding it to kids. And he did this for years. There are 400 or 500 victims at this point. And he was arrested. He was charged with this, and they knew he did it. He got paid $160,000 and got a full retirement. How is that possible? And a bill, they've.
But if you or I did that, we'd be in jail. How does a teacher get special protections that no citizen would be on, a sex offenders watch list without question? And rightfully so. And I don't even understand.
He's in jail, but they paid him anyway. He's in jail for the rest of his life. He was convicted.
But they paid him. So he's convicted of the crime, and he doesn't lose his rights to those monies. That's insane.
It's insane. In most states, that's the case. California, after that, the law was changed. But still, what do you have to do to get fired? We're gonna settle with you. We're gonna pay you. This is we're living in crazy town with this, and that's the truth. And I just you stare at this and you look at this, and for example, LAUSD, the Los Angeles Unified School District, New York City schools, they pay these claims. They're all done in executive session, so it's all in secret. There's never been a public hearing on this. If you ask them how many teachers they know of that have been credibly accused of abuse, they won't give it to you. If you request,
you can't even FOIA that, like a freedom of information request.
I've gotten nothing. They won't give it to you. In fact, earlier this year, 2 months ago, I sent a FOIA request in California. It's called the California Public Records Act, to every school district in the state, almost 1,300 districts. You know how many documents I've gotten? 3 pages. I'm not giving it to you. The thing is too broad. They're hiding it, and they're hiding it because if they tell the truth, the political reaction will be massive, and it should be. So I hope that parents are listening to this. go to their schools and say, in their school officials and say, how many people do you know of that have taught here in the last 10 or 15 years have abused kids? And watch the rats scurry for the rail.
That should be like the number one thing they should have to answer, let alone, not the number one thing they're able to hide from the public. I mean, that's insane. And rest assured, after this is done, I'm going to send this to every congressman I know to be like, hey, by the way, like, what the hell? I mean, this seems like an easy win that everyone in America would like.
Yeah, every member of Congress should be on this.
Are there any that have been actually, on the forefront of trying to actually do something, or is it, sort of usual congressional lip service?
In fairness, I just started trying to get down that aisle, and the only person that's been supportive, interestingly, when he was still a Republican, was Mr. Kiley. And he was the chairman of a subcommittee. I think that I know there's plenty that will be. I mean, when we were dealing with the Nassar case, we had bipartisan support on this, and I do believe there are Democrats out there who, if they understood the magnitude of this, would deal with it. I just don't think people know, and if they hear it from a lawyer, perhaps justifiably, they don't believe it, but they don't need to listen to me. They can go to the federal government's own statistics, and just every day in the paper there's something new. There's a new one all over the country.
Yeah.
And it needs to stop. And I think all of us who are, you're in a position, I'm in a position as a lawyer, we all have an obligation to try to protect kids. Especially when we're forcing them to go to this place where they're supposed to be protected. The irony about school shootings is, rightfully, we've hardened schools, we put gates around them. Think about what that's like, though, if there's a perpetrator in the school. You've put the children in the lion cage.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. Okay, well, I'm going to definitely do that. But let's talk a little bit more about teachers' unions, John. I mean, you've been very direct in saying that the unions are helping protect obviously abusive teachers, resisting mandatory reporting. How exactly and why exactly are the unions enabling this? I mean, again, I get it. I understand what they are. I'm certainly no fan of the teachers union. I've probably said publicly, I think they've probably held back our kids academically, more than any other institution or, whatever in this country. I think they've generally been a disaster. But why would they protect an abusive teacher? What's the upside for them? Is it just that teacher pays dues and therefore we got to go to the mattress for them? It feels like if there was anyone with any common sense in there whatsoever, and I'm not saying there are, that they would be like, okay, yeah, no, that's someone we're willing just to scrap and send off to jail.
Yeah. First of all, I'm not against unions. I was a member of the IBEW when I was a guy in college and the retail clerks union. And I think unions have a role in our society. But these unions have lost their way. They are led by people who truly don't, in my opinion, don't care about children.
Yeah.
And I'm not judging their character. I'm just telling you the result of what.
No, that's pretty clear. If you listen to their commentary during COVID and what they didn't want to teach, they didn't want to do remote classes, they wanted to get paid in full, and it was like, well, what are we paying you to do? To not teach and not do remote work? It's like, yeah, I too would love to take a year off or whatever it may be. It's not your job. It doesn't work that way.
I think that teachers, if you know teachers who are there for the right reasons, it's a hard job.
Yeah.
And we're looking now in California, they're expecting 40% of teachers to leave their positions in the next 10 years. They get no support from administration. Kids beat them up, and nobody does a thing. I think the problem is that it's cultural, in that the unions, the school boards, a lot of administrators look at children as a funding mechanism, not as God's little human being.
Yeah, and I believe one of the teachers' union's heads, I think I read a quote in the book, something like, I think the quote was something to the effect of, "I'll start worrying about children when they start paying union dues."
Yeah, that's the guy who used to be head of the union in New York, whose name escapes me. But yeah, I've seen that quote too, and to be honest, it sort of moves out that way. What kind of organization steps up and defends somebody who put semen in kids' cookies, and they're third graders, and we're going to negotiate on his behalf. Are you serious? Corporations don't have to defend criminals who engage in criminal activity.
Yeah.
Why are they?
Yeah,
And
I'm sure that school could have easily used that six-figure payout for something within that school, maybe to help those children, rather than give this guy who's sitting in jail a nest egg, which I'm not sure what he does with, but probably leaves it to heirs if he has them. That's crazy.
yeah, the thing that's important to understand about Los Angeles and New York in these Title I schools, and for your audience, Title I schools are basically schools that have kids that are in a low economic range, have low test scores, et cetera. And they get a lot of federal money and a lot of attention. And on back to school night in those schools, the highest paid person in the room is the teacher. And in Latino culture, I can tell you they respect it. The maestro and a maestra have tremendous respect, and these folks have taken advantage of it, almost to the point, by the way, of threatening to call what used to call ICE. If you don't do this or do that, I want to call ICE. And so you've got a lot of parents that are scared. And then the other piece of this is in Palisades or Malibu or the Upper East Side, the lowest paid person on back to school night, the lowest paid person on back to school night is the teacher.
Yeah.
And you don't see it there because parents there in those neighborhoods, they have power, they have education, they have resources, and these folks don't. And what you see is districts placing these bad apples in these schools, like the school I mentioned earlier, Miramont Elementary. It's in South LA. If you can't go out there at night, you can't. And it's incredibly dangerous. And they kept this guy there, knowing exactly what he was doing. So
I mean, in part because of your work, California lifted the statute of limitations on sex abuse lawsuits, which was obviously the right thing to do. But still, even some California Democrats again tried to push a bill that would have essentially reinstated the statute of limitations, essentially slamming the door shut on future victims. How do they even get away with it? I mean, it feels like if you're going to do this publicly in California, this is going to be written into law. Like, how can you have your name, shutting off, that statute, slamming that door, on those victims and still win elected office? I mean, I can't imagine that being possible.
It's worse than that. They not only wanted to shut it down, they wanted to eliminate or cap their ability to get damages. At one point, they proposed a fund, a fund like 9/11. If you have to have a fund to pay little children that have been molested, you have a massive problem in public schools. So, the governor has not taken a position on this. His staff actually did meet with us. But he vetoed a bill that would have allowed children who were molested in juvenile halls to file cases. So I don't know where he stands, but I don't know if I'm sure you saw that Cesar Chavez has been disclosed to have molested 13-year-old girls in the last 48 hours, which is sad and hard to believe. And the same people that were trying to advocate to kill the ability of children in public schools to make claims are out talking about how we support survivors, we love them, blah, blah, blah. And the hypocrisy there is just staggering. So as a country, we need to really look at our public education system and say there's something really broken here when 10 to 17% of kids are subject to this.
Yeah, no, again, I thought it was broken when, they graduate a lot of kids in some of these, I guess, Title I areas that, can't read or do basic math. They still get their high school diploma. I thought that was disgusting, but this is crazy. And again, given how difficult it is to figure out the reporting, if you're saying 10% that we know of, I imagine the number has to be much higher. You'd never actually know. I mean, that's what I'm trying. If they can prove 10%, imagine what they can't prove or haven't been able to, or haven't even tried to prove yet.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. A lot of people in this area think it's higher who study in this area. When your eyes start to roll back in your head when you think about the magnitude of this and the impact. When this happens to a kid, all of us have the right to choose our first sexual experience, and when that's stolen from you in third grade, and this old gross guy who's a teacher molests your kid and molests you, and that's your first sexual experience, it impacts your entire life. It
Oh yeah.
effectively is emotional murder. And so you have this, if those are really the statistics, think about the sort of exponential effect that's going to have on society. Um, and I can tell you from representing these people, they don't want to go back to school. It affects their ability to learn. It affects their ability to make a living. And prisons are filled with people this happened to, not just in schools, but other places as
Oh yeah,
kids.
that's just the start, the first domino, in a lifelong of, disaster, basically.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think government's first job is to protect the vulnerable in society, and protect our the most vulnerable of our citizens, and this is certainly in that category.
Yeah. So John, we've covered the fraud that's been uncovered in California, in the home and hospice industry, and the massive amounts of spending that just disappears off into the ether. The California Teachers Association is one of the biggest political spenders in the state. They pour millions into Democrat campaigns every cycle. That's the case nationally as well. And now those same Democrat politicians are the ones who'd have to basically hold the unions accountable for protecting predators. It seems like a pretty big hurdle to overcome. But what are the hurdles to accountability when the money flows so very clearly the way it does?
Well, I think that you have to have politicians with courage. And there are Democrats out there who have been courageous and said, I don't care what the teachers union says, I'm voting for it. So, but there's not enough of them. I would think we need a governor who takes the lead on this and says, I want to run for president. I'm going to disclose this. His wife is a survivor. Horrible. For God's sakes, say something. This is wrong. These are kids. They're kids in your schools that you're the head of. The superintendent of public instruction, say something. Our attorney general actually has done some stuff. He's actually sued districts and trying to act. Rob Bonta, who's a Democrat, but this, and we have a few Democratic legislators who actually listened to us and helped us kill this bill. But largely, they won't even meet with us. They won't meet with these children or their parents. They wouldn't meet with me. Yeah, I'm not saying he's doing that, by the way. I'm saying that he signed the bill and I give him credit for it. But he's been absolutely silent on this effort to stop children from filing suits. And again, you have to prove that the school knew. We're not saying, hey, if you're molested, you get a bunch of money from the government, that even they didn't do anything wrong. Yeah. That's not it. You have to show they knew. And if your kid goes to school and the school knows that there's a child rapist in the classroom and they do nothing.
Or another school knowingly puts them into a different school or different school district. I mean, it's sort of the same thing, right?
Amen. And so I just don't get it, and I don't understand it. I don't understand how anybody who's a parent, who's a grandparent, who's a human being, allows this to continue to go on, especially somebody who's in the education business.
Yeah, it's wild. I mean, I'm shocked to actually hear all this stuff. I mean, but John, you have said that you want Congress, the Department of Education, the DOJ to step in and address, this crisis at the federal level. In your mind, what specifically needs to happen there? Because I feel like that's perhaps a place you get a little bit more traction than certainly with Democrat legislators.
Sure. So first of all, Title IX, which the Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights runs, gives the Department of Education wide latitude to investigate this and to impose sanctions. For example, in the Nassar case, when Secretary DeVos was there, they imposed a huge fine on Michigan State for its handling on Nassar. I would think it was over $1 million. Mm-hmm.
That was the U.S. gymnastics case where the coach was like molesting the athletes?
It was the doctor, yeah. And that was our case. I represented the Olympians in that case. Mm-hmm. And so we had bipartisan support to reform there. But Title IX, most people think it applies to colleges, but they don't understand it. It actually applies also to every K through 12 public school that gets federal money in the United States, which is all of them. Mm-hmm. So And I can tell you, when we take depositions in these cases and we try them, nobody complies with Title IX in these schools. If you say, who's your Title IX rep, which every school is supposed to have, 9 times out of 10, they won't know. There's widespread non-compliance. So in these districts where this is a massive problem, the Department of Education could go in and take action and fine them. And by the way, the power includes totally eliminating federal money if they don't comply. It's a huge hammer. The Justice Department has a role in that they can file lawsuits against districts for violating civil rights. I mean, bodily integrity and not being raped by your teacher, it seems pretty fundamental to me. Yeah. And I know that there's been some interest in the Justice Department and looking at this. But I think the biggest problem and there's also a role for Congress, which is, for God's sakes, hold hearings on this. We hold hearings on everything under the sun, and yet we've got this massive problem in our country, and no one's held a hearing on it. So and what really changed Americans' minds in the Olympic context was the Senate hearings where those gymnasts testified, where Simone Biles and Aly Raisman and Michaela Maroney testified and told their stories. So those are some of the steps. I also think that the Department of Education could issue regulations that says, look, if you don't announce to parents when a teacher is removed for credible allegations, you don't get federal money. Yeah. We do that in a lot of areas. For example, the reason, when I was 18, I could drink in Washington, D.C. You can't do that anymore. And the reason for that is that Elizabeth Dole, who was the Secretary of Transportation, basically said to states, if you don't make your drinking age 21, you don't get federal highway funds. So the cabinet officials have a lot of power to do these things and impose this on states. And, normally I'm not a big proponent of federal government imposing anything on anybody. Yeah. But here I think it's warranted because they won't do it themselves. And this is not just a blue state problem. There's big problems in red states too, for the same reasons of teachers' unions.
I guess, you mentioned it a little bit, earlier on, but, on a personal note, what really led you to take up this fight in this area of law? I mean, obviously it wasn't your expertise, but you sort of got involved, and it seems like you sort of went all in, which I thank you for. Yeah,
I think it was two things. Number one, the first person I sued, the first perpetrator I sued, happened to be the principal of my high school. Now, he didn't molest me, but it turns out he molested a bunch of my friends. And so that had a profound effect on me. And I was mad. I don't know how to describe it. I just got mad. And I think my dad's from Iowa, and I was sort of raised with sort of Midwestern common sense. And I just got upset. And what I've been able to do is put together a group of people. Most of our lawyers at this point are former sex crimes prosecutors. And, I just think that, there's no gray here. And I like that. It's almost like being a prosecutor, but working outside of government. And I think our work has changed things. And, if I have 4 kids, I know you have kids, and you think about what a third grader looks like, and you put that, you think about the first day of school, mm-hmm. You pack that kid off and you entrust them with people. The schools are supposed to behave like parents. The standard is in loco parentis, in the place of the parent. And if they're not doing that, and worse, they're allowing this to happen, we need to get them. We need to, they're worse than the perpetrator, in my opinion, and almost nobody's prosecuted for it.
It's crazy. John, where can people, learn more about what you're doing? I tell people, hey, like, share, subscribe, send this one to your congressperson, your senators, even your state legislatures. Like, if there's ever an episode that you send to someone, in state government, and, hey, what are you doing about this? It's this, but, where can people go to learn more?
Well, I think there's a couple places. One, about the issue itself, is the Center for Defense of Freedom has an excellent article on passing the trash that I think lays out the problem very sucstantly. The National Center for Victims of Crime, their website is excellent. Our firm is www.manlystewart.com. We have a lot of information on there, but I think just, for example, the Justice Department's study is from, if you search, U.S. Department of Justice, K through 12 school employee sexual misconduct, it'll come right up, and you can read it. The thing I would tell people is that if you suspect this, call the police. Mm-hmm. Don't, first call should not be to the school. The first call, if your child comes home and you suspect that something's happened to your child, call the police. And sadly, then talk to the school. But the problem here is that what's happening in these cases is that when you reasonably suspect that a child's been molested as a teacher or administrator, your job is to report. Mm-hmm. And instead of reporting, they investigate themselves. Yeah. Right? Well, usually people who investigate themselves don't find themselves guilty. That's just been my experience.
So I think that's fair. Well, guys, check out all those things. Share this one with your government elected officials. It's a really big one. John Manley, thank you very much for joining us. Again, I'll contact my team. Let me know what I can do to help, but I can assure you I'm going to be doing the same thing because this is absolutely insane. But really appreciate the time and thanks for the work that you're doing.
My pleasure. And also, I want to tell you, my son's a Marine officer, so I pray for your dad and I pray for your family.
Well, I really appreciate that. I'll be praying for him as well as all our other troops. So thank you very much, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you, sir. I really appreciate you doing this. I know you.
Guys, thanks so much for tuning in. Make sure you're liking, sharing, subscribing. Again, just hit that like button. It takes like 0 time. Hit the like button. Share it with your friends. Take it, share the link with 10, 15, 20, 2,000 of your closest friends so they get it out there. Make sure you're subscribing. Hit that notification button so you never miss an episode. Check out our incredible sponsors down below and in the video description, right? It takes guts to support this kind of programming. Make sure you support those who share your values. Don't forget, you can find us on iTunes. You can get us on Spotify. If you miss the show here at its regular time, or if your friends get their podcast that way, again, make sure they're aware. That's on you guys to get the message out there. And in the meantime, guys, stay strong, stay informed, stay engaged, and always stay a little bit triggered. Thanks, and I'll talk to you all again very soon.